So welcome again to one of our Human Synergistics webinars on the topic of organizational culture and performance, specifically talking about financial performance. So very excited to talk about this topic today because it is one of the most common questions that I receive from clients. And it's something that we also see very, very frequently within the clients that we work with. And that is really the great extent to which culture predicts and drives financial performance costs in organizations. And since that's such an important topic to understand, I wanted to take a little few minutes to illustrate how this actually plays out, showing you real cases, real data, real examples, so that we can understand how our organization's culture influences profitability. So I won't go into human synergistics models. We have other content and videos and so on to support with that. Just as a very brief introduction, we're measuring essentially psychological and behavioral patterns in the terms of organizational culture with our culture level instruments. And we measure those patterns using a common circumplex model to understand those patterns of behavior playing out in organizations, and that those patterns don't operate in a vacuum. Culture within organizations comes from somewhere based on what we encourage, foster, and reinforce in what we describe as organizational climate, and that the culture that we create in our organizations have a tremendous influence and effect on what we describe as being outcomes. So these are measures of individual well-being as well as effectiveness and performance. So the connection that we're focusing on today really is the connection between organizational culture and the well-being and performance of our people, teams, and more broadly, the organization. So we measure each of these factors in human synergistics and in our tools. And the question often becomes, how can we understand what we're looking at and how that is directly connected to our organization's profitability. So we don't have to go much further, but sort of one step beyond the model that we assess really is where the organization's financial profitability, costs, and so on come into play, as well as we can show growth potential, sustainability over time, and so on. So hopefully this will make a lot of sense to most of you. When we want to understand how our organization performs financially, the predictors that drive that most directly have to do with our people, how our people are approaching their work, how they're interacting with one another, connecting with clients is the best predictor of how they perform, and ultimately thereby how our organization performs financially. So let's have a look at a few examples. As I mentioned, we measure what we call individual level outcomes. These are things like how satisfied are our people, how much stress do they experience, how motivated are they within our organization. This is real data illustrating what we find when we look in organizations that have what we describe as more highly constructive operating cultures versus organizations on the far right with less constructive and more what are described as defensive current cultures. And here we can look at how that plays out and the effect that that has on aspects of well-being. So things like satisfaction, motivation, engagement, conflict, role clarity, and so on. These are things that are not only measured by our instruments, but are typically very close to performance with regard to profitability in organizations. It doesn't take a lot of, most of the clients that we work with recognize that satisfaction, motivation, engagement play a strong part in driving employee and member performance and ultimately profitability of the business. Another very good example on the right-hand side is stress. Stress in client organizations that we work with is very strongly correlated and associated with things like rates of burnout, employee turnover, levels of conflict within the organization, and those factors, sick days and so on, those factors, of course, have a cost. So it becomes quite clear to be able to understand not only what is our culture, how is that influencing our people, but how that then has an effect on our bottom line. As I mentioned, we also measure factors at the group and team level. Again, hopefully this is is pretty logical, but the more our teams are focused on behaving in constructive, goal-oriented, collaborative, problem-solving, learning-oriented sorts of ways, the more effectively they are able to work as a team, the higher level quality and consistency of quality that they're able to perform, and the more effectively they're able to work together. These also have costs to organizations in terms of how our teams work collectively together, the quality that we're able to deliver through our teams, the consistency with which we're able to do that. We also measure outcomes at the organizational level. These primarily have to do with things like quality, how effectively we serve our customers, and the ability of the organization to adapt to changing marketplace, customer needs, and so on. So again, these are organizational performance criteria that I think logically we can recognize how those connect to profitability of the business. If we're delivering high quality products and services, doing that consistently, if we're connecting with and serving our customers effectively, if we're able to recognize the need to change and effectively respond to that, that bodes well for not only the profitability, but sustainability of the organization long term. So these are all things that we see not only again in research, but data, but also in clients. Now, how this actually plays out in terms of driving profitability differs to some extent across also things like industry. So for example, in financial services, we find things like increases in customer feedback and what are called promotion scores, the satisfaction of our customers, likelihood of repeat business, and so on. We work with many organizations in the transportation industry where we see tremendous financial savings in the area of more constructive cultures, reduce the frequency of errors, mistakes, and accidents that happen, which are obviously a focus for organizations in that industry as well. So depending on the industry we're talking about, of course, there are different performance criteria that connect directly with profitability. And these are things that we try to identify when we begin working with clients so that we can not only measure culture, but understand how their culture is affecting their performance and profitability and sustainability within their industry. A nice example of this actually comes from our colleagues in office in Australia. This is a case study in terms of an organization called SHAPE in the manufacturing and construction industry. And we can see a host of financially linked outcome criteria that they've looked at with regard to their culture: financial results, project delivery and safety records, sales numbers, employee turnover and engagement numbers, and so on. Again, we can look within an organization, give enough data, and look at how our culture plays out currently and the effect that that has on these kinds of performance criteria. So here we have a wonderful example of an initial measurement in the culture, a development where we remeasured at a later point, have built a more constructive organizational culture, and that does in fact predict and drive more positive results. So we're looking at very important factors like net profit. So by the way, the bold baseline is our target. So we're looking at to what extent we meet or exceed the target, the blue bars extending upwards, or we missed our target, the red and green bars extending downwards. So you can see with net profit, the more constructive our culture is, the more positively that bodes for our profitability. Also our employee turnover and churn rates, safety numbers, client feedback and satisfaction, and overall KPIs. So very, very useful performance criteria. Again, encourage all of our clients to measure these sorts of things so that, again, they understand not only what their culture is, but how that's influencing their performance and profitability, and thereby giving us yet another good reason to focus on encouraging and motivating and role modeling more of those constructive behaviors that bode positively and enable our people to perform and work together at their best. Yet another very good case study, also published by our Australian office. It's a nice one because we have a tremendous amount of longitudinal data looking at not only how culture affects profitability and sustainability in this organization and costs like employee turnover and so on, but how, as a function of developing organizational culture into more constructive and less defensive directions, we can expect to see lower costs, more profitability, and positive trends in these financial numbers. Just trying to give you a few real world examples. By the way, we have many other case studies and real world examples in a few books. So I'd encourage you to have a chance, if you can, to look at those. One of these books is entitled In Great Company, which illustrates about 6 very successful culture initiatives and journeys with information relating to bottom line financial performance, as well as in this book, Creating Constructive Cultures, where we also look at financial performance in organizations in a variety of criteria and how that's influenced and predicted by organizational culture, and ultimately is the purpose by which Human Synergistics has developed these tools so that organizations can work on not only understanding their culture, but shaping and driving that in a more positive, healthy, constructive direction for financial performance, as well as for the well-being of your people. Thank you very much. I hope this was helpful to give you the context and understanding of how this all plays out and the connection between culture and outcomes and how that drives to our performance. Thank you very much for taking part.